Kangen is a special agent from an ultra-secret agency. The problem is that he suddenly finds himself in the middle of South Korea without knowing where he is or even who he is. The protagonist doesn't recognize himself and relies on the help of an artificial intelligence embedded in his body. Now, he's on a mission to discover his own name and where he came from. The story begins with our protagonist, Kangen, standing in the middle of a busy street. For some reason, he seems completely disoriented. He has no idea where he is and doesn't even know his own name. Kang notices that his clothes have a military emblem, so he assumes he is a soldier, but he can't figure out why he's wearing a military uniform. Suddenly, Kang hears a sound, and before he realizes it, his body instinctively punches a nearby tree on its own. It seemed like the protagonist didn't have control over his body, and he quickly notices this. The people passing by witness this in shock, their eyes wide in fear, but even Kang has no idea what just happened. He had heard something in his ear and simply moved instinctively toward the source of the sound. Suddenly, a voice greets him as if they had known each other for a long time. The protagonist looks around, trying to identify who was speaking, but the voice quickly explains that it's a combat support artificial intelligence integrated into his body. Kang becomes extremely curious upon hearing about the AI. The system confirms again that there is an artificial intelligence embedded directly in his body. Kang becomes even more disoriented and asks where he is and what year it is. The AI responds that it's probably the year 2024, and they are in Seoul. Then the system introduces itself as a military support AI from the year 2082. To the protagonist, this seems like a cruel joke. He asks the system if it's some sort of human from the future sent back in time. The AI tries to access its operational records to answer, but it can't find any information. Either way, Kang concludes that being a man from the future is the most likely scenario. Additionally, it seems that the system has also lost its memory just like him. At this moment, the traffic light changes and a truck driver doesn't notice in time. He begins to panic and slams the brakes at the last second, as hard as he can. Meanwhile, a red car speeding behind the truck is also forced to brake. The driver of the red car realizes he won't stop in time and swerves onto the pedestrian sidewalk, heading straight for the protagonist. The system immediately warns Kang of a likely accident. The collision happens against a barrier, and suddenly, a metal bar is propelled at high speed. Kang manages to duck just in time, barely avoiding a second accident, but the man behind him wasn't as lucky and was hit. The people passing by quickly gather to help the injured person and call an ambulance. Meanwhile, Kang notices something in his eyes and asks the system what those red and blue lights he just saw were. The AI responds that the lights were part of an image projected by the visual assistance device, functioning like an augmented reality lens. The protagonist realizes he was only able to dodge because of this projection. The bad news is that another person was hit, and it's very unlikely they'll survive for more than 5 minutes. Our boy isn't sure if they can get this man to the hospital in time. At this moment, the system suggests performing emergency surgery right there. Kang, obviously not a doctor, says he can't do that, but the system insists that he can. It walks him through the steps, explaining that they first need to assess the patient's condition. Our boy has countless questions and still feels lost, but he wants the man to survive, so with no other option, he follows the system and approaches the victim. Kang notices that the wound is deep and asks the system, worried, if they can really do this. The AI confidently responds that it has already identified the necessary tools: a needle and thread, a small knife, and antiseptic. That should be enough for the surgery. Kang repeats the instruments aloud, catching the attention of a man sitting nearby. The man asks our boy if he really knows any first aid, and, if so, offers to help. Kang is grateful for the help and instructs him to gather the necessary items. After a few moments, with the help of the crowd, they manage to collect everything they need. The spectators seem doubtful and nervous about the boy performing such a surgery, especially because he doesn't look anything like a doctor. They fear that a difficult procedure could lead to infection, or worse, death. The tension in the air is thick and is starting to weigh heavily on our boy. Now that they have all the necessary tools, the AI says it can guide his hands to perform the surgery if he grants it temporary control. Our boy would love to know what that means, but with the patient's life on the line, he doesn't have time to ask questions. So, reluctantly, he agrees. Suddenly, a blue light begins to shine around him, and his hands start moving on their own. They work with speed and precision. In no time, he's stitching up the patient's wound, his movements perfectly coordinated by the AI. Suddenly, a red alert flashes in his vision, indicating that the blood loss has exceeded expected levels and the patient's chances of survival are decreasing. The protagonist wasn't prepared for this, and he urgently asks the system if they can really save the man. Unfortunately, the AI doesn't respond, and his hands suddenly stop moving. In a moment of panic, the protagonist clumsily makes a stitch, worsening the patient's wound. After this mistake, he is sure everything is going wrong. The scene shifts to a bit later in the hospital. The doctors gather around a critical patient who has lost a lot of blood and needs immediate surgery. After a long and intense operation, the surgeon steps out of the room. The assistant doctor asks about the patient's condition. The surgeon proudly announces that the patient survived. The assistant is relieved to hear this and curiously asks if the injury wasn't as critical as it seemed. The surgeon explains that the condition was indeed very serious, but the wound had already been managed by someone unknown. This unknown person used regular thread to stitch both the inside and outside of the wound. The patient wouldn't have survived if it hadn't been for this intervention. He wouldn't have even made it to the hospital. The assistant doctor is impressed that someone used regular sewing thread to close the wound. The surgeon then reveals even more disturbing news. The stitches were so uniform and consistent that they looked as if they had been made by a sewing machine. The assistant finds it hard to believe despite all the details. At that moment, a new figure enters the scene, introducing himself as Detective Park Ji-jeon. He immediately asks about the patient's condition. The doctor informs him that the patient is stable. They then quickly ask the detective if it's true that someone performed surgery on the street. The detective confirms this, adding that he heard the person was shouting for a scalpel and ended up using a utility knife for the procedure. This revelation shocks the two doctors even more. The detective, who doesn't understand much about surgery, curiously asks if it's really possible to perform surgery under such conditions. The surgeon quickly shouts that it's definitely impossible to perform proper surgery on the street, especially with such rudimentary tools. The three discuss the absurdity of the situation and curiously ask Detective Park where the mysterious hero is. The detective explains that witnesses said the man grabbed a needle from a sewing kit and, as soon as he finished the procedure, quietly left before the ambulance even arrived. The next scene takes us to a public bathroom where our mysterious boy is washing his hands. Here, we understand that the AI didn't stop performing the surgery at that moment. It was just calculating the surgical path. Kang questions why the AI has no memory. The system explains that its memories appear to have been reset. The boy then asks if the AI remembers his name. The system responds that it does not. Upon hearing this, the protagonist decides to give it a new name. Kang then says that from now on, it will be called Jeon-jin. The system doesn't respond immediately, and he asks why he isn't getting an answer. The AI explains that it's in the process of setting its new name. It also informs him that he can change it at any time if he wants to. The protagonist jokingly suggests the name Fire Dragon. It seems like the AI is a little embarrassed by the suggestion and quickly insists that Jeon-jin sounds much better. After this conversation, Kang leaves the bathroom. He once again notices the emblem on his arm that says Earth Union. He then curiously asks the system about this emblem. John explains that the emblem is from a Special Operations military uniform of the Earth Union. Kang assumes that Jeon is from the year 2082 and that he himself is a Special Forces agent, but it doesn't make sense for them to be in the year 2024. The system simply responds that it doesn't have enough information to answer that question. The protagonist quickly suggests using the internet to get more information, but the AI refuses, citing the risk of detection, and it definitely doesn't want that to happen. Kang then asks his system how it's currently processing information. The system explains that it only receives information through sensory experiences. For example, if our boy eats something delicious, the system experiences the same sensation. It outputs information through his body and voice, but needs temporary control permission to assist during combat. John also mentions one thing it cannot do. It can help with aiming but cannot pull the trigger. Being a support system limits its capabilities. That makes sense. The protagonist feels that the system isn't trying to help with anything and decides that he needs to gather information about himself to understand why he was in 2024. The AI confirms that this is correct and that he will need to recover this information on his own. He starts looking around and sees a building where he can use a computer. Kang is sure that this is the key to solving the mystery. The AI asks if he has recovered his memories, and he replies that he hasn't. It's just that his common sense is starting to return and he believes he'll be able to gather valuable information if he can access a PC. The only problem is that he doesn't have money to access the services. Kang asks if the AI can help with this, and the AI confirms that it can, since singing is a skill required in combat, and it can assist him in this endeavor. With this in mind, the protagonist grants the system temporary control of his body. A little while later, we see our boy standing with a spoon in his hand. He's not sure if this is really necessary. The system explains that he needs to get into character, but he's totally confused as to why he needs to sing. After all, this area is literally home to a rock band that is attracting crowds. Kang isn't sure how he's supposed to compete with them. The system says that if he exhibits better skills than the singers, people will naturally pay attention to him. Our boy isn't so sure about this and feels a bit insecure, worried that he might become a laughingstock instead of getting the spotlight. He then warns his friendly AI not to overdo it because he doesn't want to embarrass himself. At that moment, Kang prepares and starts singing. People begin to turn their heads, and within a few minutes, his sweet melody fills the entire park, catching everyone's attention. The protagonist adds flair to his performance, making it even more captivating. Meanwhile, the rock band begins losing their audience, and soon everyone is talking about the guy singing so well without any instruments. In no time, the crowd disperses, leaving the band behind. The spectators are visibly moved, with some even starting to cry. They are surprised by how Kang can sing with both masculine and feminine qualities. But they find it a little strange that Kang is only singing the middle parts of the songs. Our boy gets startled by this observation, and the system quickly explains that it was only able to piece together parts of songs from street performances, which is why they don't have the complete versions. Despite this, people start showering him with money, and soon his box is full. The protagonist grabs the money and leaves the park, leaving the audience behind, eager for more of his performance. Meanwhile, we see a girl inside the PC room building who seems quite fascinated by Kang's performance. She watches him run off and then finally returns to her work. She receives a request from her superior. A customer at table 15 ordered ramen. The girl, named responds that she's on it, though it seems her thoughts are still occupied by Kang. She feels quite disappointed that he left the park just when she wanted to hear him a bit longer. Back with our guy, he's walking down the street with the box of money in his hands, heading toward his next objective. His next stop is the PC room. The system tells him to infiltrate the local area discreetly and blend in. After that, they'll need to find a way to contact headquarters. Kang promptly starts walking toward the building and soon sees a recruitment notice for part-time employees at the PC room. The sign says anyone interested must bring their ID. It seems our boy has just found the perfect way to blend in discreetly, and they even provide meals for the staff. The system quickly tells him to take the job. Our boy also decides to take the offer, and the system agrees, adding that if they secure a space, they'll have all their basic needs met, like food, clothes, and shelter. Our boy acknowledges this, though he's still unsure about the clothing part. That's when the system informs him that his military uniform has a camouflage transition feature. It's made of special fibers with shape memory, similar to a chameleon, that can take on different forms. The modular clothing can be disassembled into various pieces, offering a variety of looks. The protagonist decides to try out the camouflage feature, and a bright light illuminates him. Now, Kang is dressed in an outfit similar to a costume. He recalls seeing similar clothes on singers before. Suddenly, he sees two guys heading into the PC room. At that moment, their faces turn pale when they see Kang standing on the stairs. They quickly pass by him with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, and silently go upstairs. Our boy stands there and asks his system if their reaction was because of his outfit. Jian confirms that it's possible. He then tells his system to reassemble his outfit because he doesn't want to get fired before he's even hired. A minute later, our boy finally looks somewhat decent, resembling one of the guys they saw earlier. Once he reaches the top floor and enters the computer room, the system begins analyzing the environment. John discovers that 96% of the users are currently gaming. It scans for food and even identifies points in the space that could be temporarily used as a seating area. The analysis concludes that this is the most suitable place for our boy to stay. That's exactly what the protagonist wanted. Finally, Kang meets the manager, who asks if he has a resume or ID since he wants to apply for the part-time job. Unsurprisingly, our boy says he has neither. The manager, while a bit taken aback, says he can fill out the resume on the spot and bring the ID tomorrow. Since they're short on part-time staff, he's willing to make an exception. The protagonist nods in acknowledgement without saying much. The manager takes a quick look at the boy, noticing his handsome face, and wonders if he's just a drifter. Then, curiously, he asks if our boy can handle a frying pan since they also serve food to the gamers. The system immediately reassures Kang, saying it possesses practical cooking skills, so there's no need to worry. With that in mind, our boy confidently tells the manager that he can easily handle it. The manager then assigns him the task of making some fried rice. The protagonist confidently walks into the kitchen, surveying the area for ingredients to make the dish. He calmly instructs the system to prepare a tasty fried rice. At that moment, Jian takes control of his body and quickly assesses the kitchen, opening the fridge and pulling out ingredients. After grabbing a cleaver with impressive finesse, he begins preparing the dish. The manager can't help but notice the sound and skilled movements coming from the kitchen. Kang chops vegetables with such talent that the manager is left speechless. He's sweating, surprised that this boy isn't just frying frozen rice, but actually cooking from scratch. What's even more disconcerting is that the meal is prepared at lightning speed, and each dish looks delicious. Finally, our boy presents the perfectly crafted dish to the manager. The manager eyes the food with suspicion. Impressive delivery speed is one thing, but it's all for nothing if the food doesn't taste good. Reluctantly, he takes a bite and begins chewing. Kang waits anxiously to see if he messed up the dish. The manager chews with little expression, but after a moment he lowers his spoon, saying the food is exceptional. The man admits he was so lost in the delight of the meal that he briefly thought he was in a fancy club. At that moment, the same girl from earlier enters and jokingly asks her uncle if he's already drinking. The manager quickly introduces his niece, Seo, to our boy. He tells Seo that this is her new co-worker. The girl lights up with excitement, recognizing him as the same guy who was performing outside earlier. The protagonist looks at her confused. He has no idea how she knows about him. Seo approaches and asks why he's working part-time in a PC room. Kang responds that he's always been good at singing and claims that he's good at everything. The manager praises the protagonist and says he's thrilled to have someone as talented as him, especially since Seo can't cook and always burns things. The manager asks if there's a specific shift Kang prefers. The protagonist replies that he's just looking for a part-time job and would like flexible hours. He also mentions needing a place to stay and asks if he can use the storage room for that while he works. The manager asks if he doesn't have a home. Kang explains that he's away for a while. The manager thinks it's a big ask, but he can't bear to let this talent slip away. The man reflects on how the PC room next door is famous for its food and wonders if his own place could become famous with this hidden gem. With that thought, he decides to hire our boy, offering him a spot in the storage room, free meals, and a promise to double his salary after a week, but only if he helps boost sales with his cooking. The protagonist seizes the opportunity and quickly agrees. At that moment, a boy and a girl enter the PC room. The girl, looking exhausted, suggests they eat first before gaming, but the bespectacled boy argues that the PC room also sells food. The girl replies that the food here isn't very tasty. Just then, a sharp voice catches their attention. It's the protagonist, fire in his eyes, telling them not to judge the food until they've tried it. A little while later, Kang prepares a delicious meal and immediately orders Seo to take it to the customers. She rushes out with the plate in hand, while the pair is still doubting whether the food in this place is really worth it. Seo finally arrives with a perfectly plated dish, catching the boy and girl completely off guard. They are absolutely stunned. They haven't even started playing, and suddenly, the food has already arrived. The two remain skeptical, grumbling that they only ordered some basic fried rice, but this looks way too fancy. Seo can barely contain her excitement and tells them to go ahead and try it first. Finally, they decide to take a bite, and the moment they do, it's as if they've found true happiness. They feel like they've left this world behind, imagining themselves getting plump from eating this kind of food regularly. Both of them are ready to do anything just to have another bite. Literally in tears, their reactions are so exaggerated that even the people at the nearby table start turning their heads. The two say that this place really has the best fried rice in the world. The buzz about the delicious food spreads quickly, and soon everyone starts ordering the same dish. Seo runs to announce that 12 people have just ordered fried rice at the same time. The manager's eyes practically pop out of his skull at the news. He immediately turns to the boy and asks if he can handle all these orders. Kang sighs and quietly asks the system if it can prepare 12 portions and make them as incredible as the last one. Joe assures him that tactical field cooking is perfect for handling large batches and that keeping the quality and taste at top level is always the main priority. 3 hours later, we see the manager's eyes gleaming with dollar signs as he watches the sales numbers skyrocket in just 3 hours. He's so thrilled that he promises a double salary raise for next week. The manager finally asks the boy for his name, and our boy pulls a random name from his brain, introducing himself as Kin. The greedy manager doesn't doubt his true identity and happily says he'll make the payment to him. The manager leaves, and the system asks if the name he just gave was real. The protagonist admits he just blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Regardless, the system decides to call him Kang by that name until he remembers his real one. And that's how our boy got a job. A little later, we see him sitting alone in front of the computer, thinking about how he managed to get food and a place to stay, but he realizes he still needs an identity to receive his salary. So he turns to the system and asks if it can hack into the database. Joe confirms that it can, saying it has skills ranging from the early 21st century to 2082. This surprises our hero, and he quickly asks if that level of skill could hack into a bank. Joe responds that it's possible since it only has infiltration-related skills. Kang leans back in his chair, disappointed, thinking how he got his hopes up for nothing. The boy wonders if he is on a secret infiltration mission in 2024. He then asks the system if it can forge an identity for him. The system immediately agrees and asks for temporary control of him. After receiving permission, Joe begins infiltrating the Korean government's administrative network to find information related to him. While the system is busy with all these boring technical things, the protagonist can't help but feel sleepy. But Joe brings him back to reality, reminding him to keep his eyes open to properly collect visual data. Suddenly, they come across something significant. The name Kang is already registered, and the fingerprint matches our boy. The protagonist doesn't understand how there could be a version of him in this time period if he is a Special Forces officer from 2082. The system quickly begins searching for any records of the United Earth Forces in 2024. A moment later, it confirms that there is no record of such forces existing in this year. This only deepens the confusion, as it means that somehow he exists simultaneously in both 2024 and 2082. Joe says it can't make any judgments without the proper information, so the protagonist instructs it to dig deeper into this personal data. They might find an important clue. The system quickly complies, and after digging through his profile, it confidently states that Kang is broke. Suddenly, Seo comes running, and the system alerts him of her presence. When she reaches him, she points out how fast he was typing and asks if he knows how to program too. The boy asks her to stop spying on his monitor, clearly not a fan of having his privacy invaded. In response, she shows him a credit card, explaining that her uncle gave it to her for shopping and invites him to go with her. And we'll see it in the next episode. Remember to subscribe and leave a like.